Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of May. I have two books on my reading list that I read and am going to be discussing in separate videos. One is a review for Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner. If you'd like to see that review, it is up on my channel already. And the other is Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Pecco. This is a paranormal vampire adult fantasy romance, and I want to have a full discussion video about this book as well, so that will be coming very soon. The first category is the horror category, and I read one horror novella, and that is The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is my first Victor LaValle, and I gotta say I was not super impressed. I don't think this is a bad horror novella, I just don't think it was for me. I didn't really get creepy vibes. I talk about this a lot on my channel on like what I prefer in horror, and I want to feel this sense of impending doom or dread throughout the whole thing. Something is building up to the climactic moment, and this just had kind of creepy moments and horrific violence, but that doesn't necessarily add to this sense of like impending doom or anything like that. I thought this was fine, I just didn't think it was for me, so I ended up giving it 2 stars. Quickly, I'll talk about the nonfiction I read, which was a 5-star nonfiction, and that is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is a book I've been reading for about 6 weeks, and not because it's bad, but because it is so excellently written. This is an Indigenous science poetry memoir, kind of a combination of all these things wrapped up into one. And this had beautiful and powerful vignettes. Each chapter was kind of an analogy talking about Indigenous sciences, kind of bridging the gap between Western science and Indigenous practice, and what we can learn from each other to combat climate change, essentially. And I thought this was excellent. It read like poetry, and I really had, I guess I can't say I enjoyed it because it was very hard topic, but I think this was an excellent read. The one romance I read this month was Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola, and I gave this 3 stars. I thought this romance was okay. This is about college students Kiki and Malachi, and they are kind of seemingly opposites in the beginning of the book. Kiki is a staunch feminist and runs a radio show on her college campus, and Malachi is kind of a playboy, or he seems to have this reputation of sleeping around and not treating women very well. So at the beginning of the book, they kind of butt heads, but there is this attraction that brings them together. They end up having to work on a project together, as well as fake dating. And I don't think there was anything wrong with this book in particular. I just felt it was a little bit too long and had some pacing issues. And for me personally, these characters are like 20 maybe, and it definitely felt young to me in terms of some of the emotional maturity, in terms of some of the dialogue. And as a slightly older 20-year-old, I feel a little weird reading new adult romances sometimes. So it's not this book's fault. That is totally on me, and I recommend this book to people, honestly, but it just really was fine for me. It was just not my favorite romance of all time. The next category I'm going to be talking about is all of the Kingfisher books I read this month. I'm just trying to find another 5-star favorite in her backlist. Unfortunately, this first one is Origin Story, which is a very short horror short story, and I hated this. I thought it was boring, and I didn't think this did much of anything, and I ended up giving it a 1.5 stars. I don't recommend this at all. I don't think it was offensive or anything. It just didn't do anything. Like literally nothing. I don't really have the vocabulary to talk about short horror necessarily and what it's supposed to achieve, or what the message is supposed to be, or anything like that. but if I was supposed to feel spooked, I was not spooked. So this one just was a hard no, not for me. Another one that really didn't work for me is Bryony and Roses, and this was a 2.5 star. This is a reimagining of the Beauty and the Beast story, and this to me was very uninspiring. And I actually read another T. Kingfisher book that I'll talk about in a little bit that had a very similar theme, and I thought it was better executed in that book, but even so, I still didn't enjoy that direction. I'm trying to be vague, not spoil things, but I think in this instance there was a recycling of an idea, and since I'd read the previous one first, I think it worked for me better in that other work, if that makes sense. This was fine. It's a 2.5 star. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really enjoy my time reading this one either. Speaking of the other book that I read by T. Kingfisher that has a very similar theme to Bryony and Roses, that is A House with Good Bones, and this is T. Kingfisher's latest horror release that was just released a couple months ago, and this was aggressively fine. This is a horror short novel about Sam, who is returning to her home after being away for a while, and her childhood home has changed dramatically, and her mother is acting very strangely, and there seems to be some kind of haunting happening. And like I said, this one was just fine. I don't think it really impacted me super emotionally or super deeply. I just thought it was okay. There were some funny moments. I liked Sam as a narrator, and there were some spooky moments that I really hold on to, but again, there wasn't this theme or this build up to anything in particular that I felt throughout the entire novel. So this was a 3-star. Not a great run for T. Kingfisher, but the next two I did actually enjoy. The next T. Kingfisher was A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, and this is a middle grade fantasy story about our main character Mona, who has like a teeny little bit of magic, and she can manipulate bread dough, essentially, or dough in general. And in the beginning of the book, a dead body is found in their bakery, and Mona is implicated in this crime, and this kind of spirals into a larger conspiracy and a threat towards the entire kingdom, as many middle grade stories tend to do. We thrust our 13 or 14-year-old protagonists into a situation that is far bigger than themselves, and I thought this was delightful. I thought the writing was great. There were humorous moments, just like in many T. Kingfisher books. This is kind of epitome of what I enjoy about her writing. It deals with some pretty heavy themes and topics in a tone that is whimsical and funny at times. Her characters are usually incredibly lovable, and I truly loved Mona in this story. I loved this story. I gave it 4 stars and thought it was a blast. I promise this is the last T. Kingfisher book. I promise. I also read Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher, which is an adult romance fantasy, and I was pleasantly surprised to discover that this is set in the same world as the Paladin's Grace or the Sands of Steel series, which I had read previously. So it was kind of fun seeing some familiar characters and the familiar world building that I'd already experienced in that series. This is about our main character, Hala, who is in a really tough situation in the beginning of the book. She has inherited an incredible amount of money from a great uncle of her husband's, who have passed away previously, and her husband's family is trying to essentially steal her money from her and is keeping her prisoner in her own home. And Hala is in a desperate situation and is contemplating suicide, so trigger warning for that right away in the beginning of this book. And she grabs a sword off the wall in an attempt to fall upon it, and it turns out the sword is magical, and a knight-like figure appears out of the sword, and his name is Sarkis, and he is now sworn to protect her because she is the wielder of the blade. And so this is about Hala and Sarkis getting out of that situation and going on a quest type adventure, not only to kind of secure Hala's rightful inheritance away from her family, but also other shenanigans happen along the way. And obviously this is a fantasy romance about Sarkis and Hala falling in love, and I thought this was delightful. I enjoy when T. Kingfisher writes about slightly older protagonists. I believe Hala is 35 or 36 and Sarkis is like 40, and so I really appreciated that. The reason I gave this 4 stars instead of 5 stars is that this does fall into a romance trope that I dislike heavily, which is a third act breakup, and then the main characters immediately realize their mistake, but they have to separate in order to realize that mistake, and then they come back together almost immediately. And the issue I have with that is I believe Sarkis really did mess up in this one. I don't want to spoil it, obviously, but Sarkis really, really messed up, and I think Hala forgives him really easily without really dissecting the break of trust that happens and confronting that. And I don't think Sarkis really deserved her forgiveness, at least so quickly. It just seemed a little too easy and convenient. I still enjoyed my time reading this story overall. The quest was fun. I do like these 2 characters together. There's a little bit of steam, which I enjoy. And overall, this was just a great T. Kingfisher read. Again, not a 5 star though. I'm still hunting for a T. Kingfisher 5 star. The last category we're going to be talking about is fantasy, and the first book I'm going to be discussing is A Conspiracy of Truths by Alexandra Rowland. If you've been on my channel for the last couple of months or weeks, you know that Alexandra Rowland's A Taste of Gold and Iron is like a new obsession of mine. I'm completely obsessed with it. So I decided to read their backlist and started with A Conspiracy of Truths. And this is a very political story with a really interesting protagonist. This is about a 70-year-old main character who doesn't have a name and only goes by his profession. He is a chant, which is essentially a storyteller or a person who travels around and collects stories from all over the region and kind of memorizes them and passes stories along. And he kind of gets into a situation where he is captured and they think he's some kind of spy, and he's trying to wheedle out of these accusations and ends up embroiled in like a really intense political plot, and he's kind of used as a political pawn against the 5 branches of the government, essentially. And he is also using the situation he is in to manipulate the 5 heads of government in his favor to get out of the situation. He's just trying to survive, but he's pulling on some political strings while he's in prison. So most of this book takes place while Chant is in prison. This was super interesting politically, and I really enjoyed my time reading this. However, I feel like Chant as a main character is a little emotionally distant, and I enjoyed his apprentice named Ilfing more. I think Ilfing had a little bit more emotional depth to him than Chant. And the second book in the series is about Ilfing, following Ilfing, and so I'm excited to read the second one. I still gave A Conspiracy of Truths 4 stars and really, really enjoyed the world building, the tone, the vibe, the politics of this story I thought were excellent. I just didn't enjoy our main character that much. I also read Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and I gave this 4.25 stars, I guess. I don't know. I've been using 0.25 stars lately, and it's just a thing. But this is about Theodora, and at the beginning of the story, a demon arrives and is able to steal like half of her soul. And what this means is she doesn't feel the feelings as deeply as quote-unquote normal people. She understands when she's supposed to be feeling fear and happiness and sadness, but she just kind of has dampened emotions. So she is incredibly autistic coded. So I was really hesitant going into this, thinking, okay, the whole shtick is her trying to get her soul back, or her half a soul back, and also fall in love. And this is a fantasy romance story, and so I was really, really worried that she would be magically healed and that the autism would magically go away, and that's not what happens. And I'm really happy to say that she's not magically healed by the end of this book, and she is loved for who she is currently. And I actually really thought the adventure aspect of the story was fun. There is kind of a Regency style romance with a fairy tale twist to it, which I thought was a lot of fun. Overall plot of this was fun as well. Not just the romance aspect, but the plot surrounding this romance was excellent. And I really, really enjoyed my time reading this and gave it 4.25 stars, and I would love to keep reading in this series. My favorite read of the month is Completely Irrational. And I acknowledge that, admit that this book isn't perfect, but it's very nostalgic for me, even though I've never read it before. And this book I'm talking about is Arrows of the Queen by Mercedes Lackey. This is a young adult, bordering on adult fantasy story about a young girl at the time, Talia, who is chosen by a magical horse to become a herald of the queen. And heralds act as the queen's messengers, her spies, her confidants. They administer the queen's justice. They do rounds around the kingdom to make sure everything is going okay. So kind of like sworn knights, but a little bit different. And Talia has always dreamed of becoming a herald, and she is chosen in the beginning of the story. So in this first book, she is at herald school, essentially, and a lot goes down in the years she's in herald school. And if you know me at all, you know that Tamara Pierce is one of my favorite authors of all time. And Mercedes Lackey and Tamara Pierce were writing at about the same time this same type of story. I believe the Heralds of Valdemar series was written in 1987, which is around the time that the Song of the Lioness Quartet came out. And that is one of my favorite stories of all time. It's very nostalgic for me. It has a very similar vibe. And so reading Arrows of the Queen to me was like reading a book I've read before in a super comforting and nostalgic way. And I mean that obviously very positively. It was like opening up a door to my childhood, even though I've never read this before, which I thought was incredible. And it was an experience I've never really felt before. I haven't found another book like the Song of the Lioness Quartet that made me feel like that. So I don't mean to gush and wax rhapsodic about this book, but it truly did something to me emotionally. And this is a hard-hitting book. There were some moments where I cried. There were some really dark themes, and that's why I say this is almost bordering on adult, because of some of the things that happen to Talia and around her. But it was so comforting for me, and I mean this in a nice way. I fell asleep reading this book multiple times because it was so comforting, and I can see myself returning to this book and this world and this series over and over and over again. That's all I'll say. This is a new 5-star read. I'm irrationally in love with Arrows of the Queen. I also picked up the sequel, Arrow's Flight, which is about Talia going on her 1.5-year-long internship, essentially to test her ability as a herald. And I love this cover, by the way. I think these classic 80s and early 90s covers are really special. And I didn't love this one as much, but I still really enjoyed it. Now, this one is full-on adult, I just want to say, and trigger warning at the very end. There's a pretty horrific moment where rape is brought up, and it's pretty disgusting, so just heads up for that. but this was still an excellent expansion on the first book. We really dive into Talia's magic in this one and flesh out the role of the Herald even more. And I really enjoyed my time reading this, despite that little moment at the end. I can confidently say that the Valdemar world is my new obsession, and I want to read everything in this 40-book series. Those were all the books I read in May. What did you read in May? I would love to know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye.